Not on?
My apologies, that has not been on, and I just turned on the meeting video and audio, so it's now.
Okay,
Can be
so
heard.
I'll repeat a repeat of that. We're on item 1, which is our call to order. We're conducting this meeting with a virtual component. If you wish to address the committee virtually, join on Zoom using the link or phone number and webinar ID shown on the screen. For in-person attendees, we have speaker cards, which we can hand to you as you enter the room. So we are now on item number 2, which is roll call. Ms. Lee, can you please take roll?
Certainly, Chair Hicks. All the members are present.
Okay, thank you. Item number 3 is minutes approval. First, we'll look at the CSC meeting minutes from November 24 of 2024. Does anyone have comments or questions? Seeing none. Does anybody have, do any members of the public have comments on the meeting of minutes? No. And who is monitoring the virtual? Thank you. No, okay, thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
So it passes unanimously. Now we're on item 4, which is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for people wishing to address the committee on matters not on the agenda. You can speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes. And state law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agendized items. Would any member of the public like to provide comment on an item that's not on the agenda? So I see nobody either in person or virtually. So we'll now close the oral communications item and move to the discussion and action items. Item 5, which is new business. We'll start with 5.1, which is greenhouse gas-free fleet and landscaping equipment purchasing policy. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee will commence the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hicks, and good evening, committee members and members of the public. I'm going to introduce this item and then hand over to Ms. Lynn, who will be presenting the bulk of the actual proposed policy. And you'll note that, within this item and then kind of across the agenda, we have been shaping items for your committee and for the council's ultimate consideration that are assuming kind of this federal context stays stable. But there are things that were fed into this analysis and other items that we've been working on that as of now are standing, rules around vehicles, for example, in this item. And we will continue to keep you updated if there are changes in the regulatory environment. So I just wanted to make a note of that. That being said, we're really pleased to be bringing this policy to you. Within the Sustainability Action Plan for council directed staff to identify strategies for electrifying our fleet. And this policy will be a foundational piece in. I'd like to hand it over to Ms.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Start with some background and our fleet and the context of our city municipal operation emissions. Vehicle fleet and equipment represent 33% of municipal operation of emissions. And as Ms. Lee mentioned, SAP4 directs staff to develop a clean fleets policy and to address off-road equipment emissions as well. A greenhouse gas-free or electric first purchasing policy is one tool that can advance decarbonization in that vehicle and equipment sector. What is a greenhouse gas-free purchasing policy? It's a policy that promotes or requires the purchase of low emission equipment and vehicles. And it provides a decision-making process to prioritize low emissions equipment and vehicles that may cost more upfront. And it helps to strategically plan with the transition by supporting infrastructure deployment such as electric vehicle charging accommodations for landscaping equipment. Who has adopted this policy? We found at least 19 clean fleet policies across the region, state, and country, with several examples locally in the Bay Area. And let's take a look at what our fleet is comprised of. So we have approximately 250 active vehicles, 60% of which are light duty and 40% of which are medium and heavy duty. And in this case, light duty means passenger vehicles, small trucks, and SUVs, whereas medium and heavy duty vehicles are larger trucks and specialty vehicles and emergency vehicles such as fire engines. We have a robust set of landscaping equipment, which includes both handheld landscaping equipment as well as off-road landscaping equipment, mowers, and also construction equipment like bulldozers as well. So what is the state context in which we're proposing the greenhouse gas free policy? There are a few state regulations that are really pertinent to these purchases already. There is the Advanced Clean Cars 2 initiative from the California Air Resources Board, which governs the sales of passenger cars, trucks, and SUVs. And starting in 2035 bans the sale of gas vehicles, but not the usage. It's the sales of vehicles moving forward. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, on the other hand, is aimed at transitioning medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets specifically to zero emission. And from 2024 to 2026 requires at least 50% of annual purchases in the fleet to be zero emission. And this moves to 100% requirement in 2027. As for landscaping equipment, there is the small off-road engine regulations from the California Air Resources Board that governs these purchases. Starting in 2024, the sale of gas-powered equipment was banned. So that includes handheld landscaping equipment and mowers, both push mowers and ride-on mowers. So on top of this context, staff is proposing this greenhouse gas free fleet and vehicle purchasing policy, which in short would require that all on-road and off-road vehicles and landscaping equipment to be electric if the following criteria are met. If the equipment is commercially available, if it meets operational needs, is financially feasible, which includes fuel savings from switching from gas or diesel to electric. There is EV charging available or can be made available in a reasonable period of time to support that equipment and vehicle purchase, and that there are adequate accommodations. And by adequate accommodations, that means that there is, for example, for a vehicle, a parking space where there can be conduit and electric vehicle charging that can reach that space to service that vehicle. So what would policy implementation entail, and what's the cost of fleet electrification? So the cost of light duty fleet electrification in the near term from 2025 to 2030 is about $5.5 million. And this cost estimate includes the purchasing price, fueling costs, and operations and maintenance costs. It does not include the electric vehicle infrastructure costs and does not include federal incentives, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, the value of that brings to the EV, how that supports electric vehicles. And just a further note on that, the total cost analysis does consider that we provided in the report is based on existing regulations. And we just wanted to highlight the light duty vehicle costs, as that would be the highest impact area for this policy. And then looking forward, aside from that one slide to the electric vehicle charging costs, So on top of the vehicle costs, we have, of course, the infrastructure costs that are needed to support the vehicles. 29 EV charging ports would need to be available at City Hall, Municipal Operations Center, and Shoreline Maintenance Center by 2030. Those are our three primary large city vehicle domiciles. So that's kind of the short term, what needs to be deployed in the short term. And then over the course of like the fleet being electrified through 2040, we'll need 113 new EV charging ports at approximately $4 million cost total for those installations. And throughout those projects, it's likely that there'll be some electrical infrastructure upgrades required throughout the process to support the EV charging if there isn't adequate power at the site. And we're exploring some programs which I'll go into that support that. So staff has submitted a request for the capital improvement program for funding for the electric vehicle charging stations. And everything else on the slide mentions like other supporting efforts that we're looking at to reduce city costs. So the Inflation Reduction Act direct pay incentives are valued at $7,500 per light duty vehicle, and then $40,000 for large like heavy duty vehicles. So that's something that we're actively pursuing and applying for. There's also a program from Pacific Gas and Electric called the EV Fleets Program that pays for a dedicated electrical meter to charge city fleet electric vehicles. And we estimate the value of that program at around $200,000 for the city based on a comparable city with the comparable service population. Staff is also exploring a California Energy Commission grant opportunity, which is administered through a company called Better Fleet, which will, which if we decide to participate and move forward, will provide charging optimization support for the city fleet and subsidized electric vehicle charging stations. And we continue to evaluate additional grant opportunities for electric vehicle charging. Okay, moving into some progress updates of, we've made a lot of progress so far and wanted to highlight that also in the context of this policy. The police department is in the process of purchasing a few electric vehicles, including patrol rated electric vehicles and some electric vehicles for school resource officers. And we have our police captain there, Wahid, kind of as a champion of our pilot who are working with cross-departmentally to implement that electric vehicle pilot. The Community Services Department has also made a few electric vehicle purchases recently to electrify their parks operations. And we see one of the vehicles there showcased at Earth Day in the background. And there have been, a few vehicles purchased to support electric park operations. CSD also has already converted half of its handheld landscape equipment to electric already. So half of that has already been converted. And there are 2 additional electric ride-on mowers that have been, I believe, have been purchased and staff are waiting on to implement to support parks servicing. The city also displayed at our Earth Day was the electric community shuttle. The city is leasing 4 community shuttles that will go into service later this spring, and that's what is shown on the screen. And the city was awarded a federal grant to purchase 4 electric community shuttles, which are expected to arrive in 2027. And then we are also, of course, pursuing electric vehicle charging strategically. So the purchase for 2 solar and battery electric vehicle chargers are underway to support the police department's electric vehicle pilots, as well as the other vehicles at the Municipal Operations Center. So there's 2 units, one going to the police department and the one going to the Municipal Operations Center. Right, so to summarize, the greenhouse gas free policy would further this progress at the city by establishing a clear leadership role, integrating decarbonization goals into city operations, and supporting financial and infrastructure planning by providing a clear idea of how many vehicles will be electrified over time and a clear policy around that. We anticipate that the policy will have different levels of impact on the different equipment categories. We think there'll be a low level of impact on medium and heavy duty vehicle purchases because the existing regulation is very strict and very ambitious. As we mentioned, there's half of vehicles need to be zero emission, purchases need to be zero emission from now until 2026, and then they'll all need to be zero emission after 2027. So that's already pretty ambitious. We expect a medium impact on landscaping equipment, and that this policy would support continued city leadership in the area of landscaping equipment electrification. And then with light duty fleet, that would be, you know, pretty high impact of the policy, like greatly accelerating the path to electrification. Although I will mention that it is in line with the state policy to ban the sale of gas vehicles starting in 2035 and allows the city to have a smooth ramp up to implementing that policy rather than having a very dramatic implementation once there are no longer gas vehicles sold. It's kind of it's an acceleration, but also in line with the existing state policy. Next steps, we look forward to hearing your feedback and thoughts on the proposed policy and would bring it to City Council for adoption if.
I just wanted to underscore how much collaboration has happened already across the many departments that are operating equipment and vehicles for the city operations. This policy is really meant to cement something that's already working really well, but part of our efforts are to really ingrain sustainability across the organization. So this is a formalization of something that is already off to a great start. We have colleagues online that are available to answer your questions from the various departments. So if you have any questions specific to CSD or Public Works, our colleagues are also available. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. So we will start with questions from committee members. Are there any questions?
Well, my question really was going to be kind of what you started explaining it. Basically, how different would this make it? It would formalize it, but in terms of cost outlays, do you think it would make a big difference in how much money we're spending?
I think it will prompt us to have discussions. So already, I've met with Derek, Rampone, and Betsy to talk about if we change the types of vehicles that we're purchasing, how do we reflect that in the budget? How do we capture savings? You know, fuel savings are typically, you know, fuel is budgeted in one department, but the capital outlay to purchase a vehicle might be in another department. So if we change our procurement practice, then how do we change our budget and kind of cost recovery to follow suit? So having a policy like this would then just open the door to say, okay, well, this is the direction of council. We anticipate purchasing more and more electric vehicles. And then having it be rather than it being catch as catch can, which, you know, we've been pretty successful at, as you've seen. This can be a more systematic way to do it. And then we can think about like all of the infrastructure that would support operations and the finance piece of it.
And it seems like there's kind of built in a about whether it was feasible, you know, financially feasible. That seems to me something that gives whoever's implementing it some necessary judgment room. Or if it's, you know, just really very, very expensive. Because I mean, in some things, I'm sure, like I was talking to the fire chief last year, and apparently fire engines aren't there yet, but they're watching it. And so I can imagine it differs. Consider, you know, these specialty vehicles. It differs a lot depending on which one you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, mutual aid, for example, if we sent an engine somewhere else to respond to a fire, would we know that there are chargers there as well? You know, so many considerations for certain specialty classes. And we would definitely not be forcing electric vehicle purchases on all of the departments. This policy was developed in partnership with all of the departments. They, you know, they would be part of any request for exemptions. It really is meant to just turn our initial assumption about the kind of vehicle that we would purchase from gas vehicle, where we would have to justify purchasing an electric vehicle to saying, we're gonna start with the assumption that we would purchase electric, and then we wouldn't make that purchase if it doesn't make sense operationally or financially.
That would be, the policy mentions the capital outlay committee. I assume it's someone in finance or some.
It's an interdepartmental team, includes FASD, which is our financial administration office, sometimes folks from Public Works. And it's kind of the interdepartmental collaboration of like, does this purchase make sense when it maybe doesn't align with like the lowest cost or somebody's requesting
Yeah,
something additional.
that's why I was just curious. It seems like they're kind of the they make go no-go decisions. about
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
those
so-
things. And then you mentioned some of this, the subsidies and grant opportunities, and it looked like the primary state opportunity was, through All Energy, mostly, charging infrastructure. Is the state providing any other grant opportunities, given that they're the ones proposing the the deadlines, or not really right now?
Well, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
Was meant to pair with it, and so it's such a significant incentive that I think having a regulation that would also accelerate it made sense. There aren't additional state incentives right now. We've had various grant offerings for EV charging, both from the federal and state level, not all specifically targeting municipal. Some are just for the public at large to add more EV structure. But I don't think there are additional state incentives that are current.
I was kind of getting at if the IRA, you know, if there are granted funds, which are probably fine, but then who knows about future grants, and I just didn't know if anyone was gonna try and backstop a tiny portion of that.
Right,
But
I mean,
we'll see.
we had a EV charging grant application submitted to the,
California Energy.
so this, but also there was a federal one as well.
Yeah.
that was frozen, so, yeah. That's a quickly shifting landscape, so.
And then I guess that leads you to the one other question that I had is, I assume it looked like in reading through the policy, there's enough flexibility to where, you know, we're going to do things that are feasible in the moment. So for example, if we have a temporary economic condition, hopefully a temporary economic condition like a tariff that makes charging infrastructure or vehicles, you know, 20% more expensive than they would be a year from now, that we could just bank that money, you know, and like catch up.
Yeah, I mean, we may well not purchase as many vehicles in general. Right, like, so of course, we wouldn't.
But we could save those funds so that we have them when the time to strike is right. Yeah, we can still do that. But yeah, I just wouldn't want to be in a position where we're actually overpaying for things
Well, and-
unnecessarily for a
and to-
year or two.
Right, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure, this policy doesn't appropriate any funds.
Yeah.
Our current vehicle replacement fund is mostly, it's calculated based on like for like replacement. Most of our vehicles are gas, they're not GHG free vehicles. And so we have been budgeting up until now for gas vehicles. If we implement this policy, then there will be kind of another piece that has to happen in conjunction with FASD. Perhaps it'll be a accelerated spend down of the existing fleet replacement fund in the short term, and then a rethinking of like, what does the vehicle replacement cost look like? Our preference is to have electric vehicles. So it doesn't appropriate, we would bring further things like that to the full council to make any changes in our budget appropriations.
The policy look like it accounted for that because there are options like, deferring the replacement.
Right.
Retaining surplus, using hybrid vehicles.
So I'll say the overriding umbrella, for all of my questions is, actually, I'm gonna channel Margaret Abicoga. If you, Chris, you're her replacement on the committee who, was saying that, she wants, more action and larger action to planning ratio. And so, that's kind of the lens I'm seeing all of this through. Not that I don't want planning, you need planning before action. And thank you for this planning. But so with this, when I read the total cost of ownership for electrification of the fleet by 2042 is 20 million plus, compared to 11 million plus for replacing fossil fuel vehicles like for like. So that's just a $9 million difference. And we're talking about 2042 now to 2042. So over 17 years. So that's just like spending half a million more per year, which is peanuts in our CIP budget. So am I calculating that wrong?
No, and it doesn't take into account the inflation reduction.
Okay, savings, it also-
More favorable.
Yes, and then on the other side,
Or
it
less.
also doesn't have, that's just replacement of fleet. It doesn't have the charging infrastructure and save on electricity versus gas. So it doesn't have all the variables. But $500,000 a year is honestly, compared to a lot of other things we do, so cheap that I guess at the same time, you have the state telling you that you have to buy what that is. But it just makes me think, are there any ways you can think of to tweak it to do a little more? Because to me, this looks like we're really doing this on the cheap, and I lean more into action, and like you said, I don't want to force firefighters to be in electric fire trucks that won't make it to the fire and back. And, I don't mean push it like that. But do you have any, given that it is so cheap compared to other things we do, and transportation, as we'll see later in the staff report, is important. I mean, it doesn't all come from our own fleet, but it's an important, precedent to set to show people that we can do it and they can too. Are there any things that come to mind that would allow us to tweak it and push it forward a little more?
Yeah, and I have a quick answer for you, and then I see that Deputy Director Boyer has also indicated that she has a response on behalf of Public Works. But I will just say that we included a lot of information about the work that was underway already to underscore that all of the departments are actually implementing already. There's electric vehicles in our parks and in our fleets, and we're getting chargers. This is a tool to empower them to go even faster, but it's not that there hasn't already been really great work undertaken by our departments, led in large part by Public Works. Allison, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Allison Boyer, Assistant Public Works Director. I have fleet in my division, and one thing I really agree with where you're coming from, and the more we can do to electrify the fleet is great. I just want to point out that along with the charging infrastructure, there is a maintenance infrastructure side that our current mechanic area would not meet code and regulation for maintaining an electric fleet. So there is a capital cost that will come as we start to build up our fleet. And I just want you to be aware of that also, added cost when you're, we're not going to change we're not changing policy. We're still going to keep moving, but there's a little bit more planning that we still need to do before I'm ready to jump and say we'll do all of the vehicles that we ever have to buy. There is some some other planning that needs to happen to make sure that we can, if we're not maintaining all of those vehicles, that we have the right contracts in place to do that.
Okay. I think my other questions are relative details to understand it better. Well, there was a little talk in the staff report about how the current federal administration may take actions that impact the state's ability to enact CARB's rules. I don't know if you have any more to say on that or other impacts from the federal administration on this.
Yeah, well, the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, has been identified specifically, and then both of the CARB rules that we referenced have also been identified, but they stand currently. I don't know how that process will unfold. We're certainly watching it.
So you don't have any specific.
No, because the EPA granted the state the ability to regulate the vehicles. So the question is whether that can be undone. I think it has to wind through the courts. I just don't know how quickly we'll know an answer.
Okay, then, so, I'm trying to, understand what you were trying to tell us through tables 1 and 2. Are you saying that, table 2 is doing it sooner, or what were you trying to tell us through? Was it showing us how to, the different financial impacts depending on if we did it slower or faster?
So table 1 is for the full fleet, faster and slower. Table 2 is for the light duty fleet only, faster and slower. And I think the reason we included the slower is even though we have these regulations that are in place that will de facto make us go faster, if they don't get enforced, I say, if they're dismantled, then you would know what the longer term look like.
Okay.
Again, so that if there aren't regulations pushing us to purchase electric vehicles.
Okay.
Or if they're not banned, sale of them is not banned, non-electric vehicles is not banned, then.
Okay, so your assumption is we would go with the faster route unless. Okay, now I understand better. Do you ever look at not only electrifying vehicles, but also buying smaller vehicles? Because I've seen that done in some places and it can make a lot of. Is that ever a part of this policy?
I have not done that personally, but we have looked at the size of our fleet overall. When I was at the county, San Mateo, when we're looking at the total municipal fleet and the actual utilization rate.
Oh, okay,
Right,
that's
so
a good one. I hadn't thought of that.
Exactly. With COVID, kind of understanding what that pattern actually is a little bit harder because we don't know what our baseline utilization is. Because the last several years have been anomalies. But soon, I think, we'll have data to point us to utilization information. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yes, we have Natalie Hansen, who is with Optity, who conducted the fleet electrification study. So I believe she has a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to chime in here on the downsizing vehicles. We did look into that in the fleet study. So the recommendation for each of the replacements that now fleet has in hand identifies a few opportunities where an F-250 would have been downsized to an F-150, and it's the F-150 Lightning as the EV replacement because it can fulfill the duties of that F-250 combustion engine. So yeah, we definitely looked into that in the process of the fleet strategic planning.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that there's small fire vehicles that wouldn't replace the big ones, but there was talk in the staff report of doing more research on the fire, and I think that might be a productive part of it, but that's a comment, not. see. And do we have any preliminary reports on the landscaping equipment and how that's working out? Because there are a lot of people interested and also people saying it does and doesn't work well, so I'd like to know about that.
Mr. Youngberg from the Community Services Department is online.
Yep. Yeah, good evening. Tim Youngberg, Parks and Open Space Manager. We've been using the electric equipment for quite a while now, quite a few years, and we've been going about it as very paced. We haven't gone out and bought just one particular piece of equipment. We've actually been trying different vendors, different models, different brands to try to see what works best before we go all in. So like the staff report said, we're a little bit over 50% of our handheld equipment being all electric. And it's just kind of as something that is a gas 2-cycle engine. We're not going to replace it. We're not repairing it. We're going straight to electric. So no new gas powered equipment is being purchased this time. So technology is evolving daily. You know, things that we were buying 2 or 3 years ago have gotten tenfold better. Same thing with our mowers. Mowers just a few years ago, you didn't have the ride-on mower that was electric. It is now. So we're just kind of going it as slow paced. The good thing on our end, as far as charging, we just need a plug to be able to charge our batteries and our backpacks, that type of stuff. Not as in depth as the cars and the trucks that we're purchasing. So we have like little satellite storage buildings along all the parks where we can charge our batteries. We can do that type of stuff. And just a little side note and self-promotion, as we get ready to open Evelyn Park here in probably the month of May, it'll be the first all-electric park. So no gas consumption will be done with the landscaping equipment at that park. The mowers, the blowers, everything will be all electric.
So are different parks done differently? It's just that you don't have all electric for everywhere.
Right. So not to get into the minutia of how all the parks are, but typically one staff member has maybe 5 parks. So that person might have all the electric equipment on hand, but the other staff member might have 1 or 2 pieces of gas and 1 piece of electric. So as things get phased out or phased in, we'll start to have all electric, and then all the parks will eventually be all electric. But until that happens, there might be somebody that doesn't have it, and I don't want to, put a sign up that said this park is all electric when somebody rolls up with a gas mower, and that kind of defeats the purpose.
I see, great. Thank you, because I didn't understand that when I read it in the staff report. Okay, my last question, Mr. Youngberg, do you or can you ever, or anybody with your staff talk to folks from the Day Worker Center who are training educating people who do landscaping throughout Mountain View and maybe other cities as well, because you're trying so many different kinds of equipment?
So a couple of things. One is I know that the group there with sustainability has sponsored day worker events. We've held it at Ringstorff Park where they've used the new electric equipment. So that is definitely happening. I host various events for other agencies. We've done 3 or 4 now at McKelvey, where we bring in all sorts of other agencies and try out new electric equipment. So we're trying to be the leaders in it and try to put forth, when we're asking these local landscape companies to start using all electric and we're not, that wouldn't look very good. So we're kind of the first ones to be going all electric and, leading by example.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, so those are all my questions. Did anyone think of any additional questions? Okay, so then are there any comments from the audience on this item?
I do have a comment. Hi, I'm Bruce Carney, a longtime resident. Back in 2008, I led the first environmental sustainability task force. And one of the core attributes of that task force was our belief that biodiesel was the answer to many of the challenges facing the planet. Turns out that biodiesel was sort of just something that came and sort of went. And so the reason I bring that up is I would like to ask staff to be aware, staff and the committee to be aware of 2 things in particular. One is the recent announcement that a refinery in Northern California and a refinery in Southern California both announced that they're going to shut down reducing the supply of gasoline in our state by 21%. Our state is sort of an island for gasoline. And so if the supply goes down by 21%, even as electric cars become more and more popular, I would anticipate in the near term, a very rapid increase in the price of gasoline and diesel fuel for vehicles. So wondering if that assumption was in any way in the data that you're looking at. Second thing I'd like to say is that a month or so ago out of China came the news that there was a company whose EV could be recharged about 80% in 5 minutes. You know, if this technology is real, it is an absolute game changer. It would make me want to say, well, why are we putting chargers in multifamily apartments? It's just going to be the gas station model. We'll have 18 or 20 EV stations, like we have 18 or 20 gas stations in Mountain View. They'll sell you snacks and beer while you charge and refuel your EV. They must have an enormous connection to the grid. You wouldn't want too many of these around. It's almost substation level if they're going to be charging 5 or 6 vehicles all at the same time. So all of the assumptions about city-owned EV charging infrastructure up to 2040, I think have to have a huge asterisk around them. It's my understanding that this Chinese technology for rapid EV charging is something that the company who developed it will be wanting to license to other EV manufacturers. So we may see it in the US quite soon. Let's see. The woman who spoke about retraining the maintenance people. I've owned an EV for 7.5 years. It is just a light duty vehicle, but there's no maintenance. I changed the wipers and the tires and the air filters. That is 100% of the job. And you know what? I can do that myself, except for the tires. I had to buy those at America's Tire. So I'm very pleased by what you put on the table and look forward to its rapid implementation.
Okay, any other in-person speakers?
Good evening. My name is Hala Al-Shawani. I'm also a longtime resident in Mountain View. Yeah, the same thought occurred to me. I've had an EV for 11 years and another one for 6 years, and there is no maintenance. The electric cars have 1 or 2 electric motors. That's it. And batteries. And the batteries, if they need replacement, hopefully they don't. But if they do, that may be a big cost, but that doesn't happen for a long time. So there is much, much lower maintenance for the EVs. So that's something to consider. Yeah, and thank you for this great proposal, because it makes it, like you're saying, more systemic, so that it happens hopefully at a faster rate. And I support Allison in her remarks that would be, because we want these actions to take place faster. Lowering the greenhouse gas emissions for 2 electric cars is probably the most impactful in all of the categories that we try to lower the greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you.
Video, also excited to see that this is going to be the new policy that's coming in place, and sort of a question. I'm hoping that if the Parks and Rec Department has contractors, such as, I know they have some contractors, the tennis courts at Festa, that they are also moving to electric devices. So I see people over there with leaf blowers. I don't know if it's the park staff or if it's the tennis court staff, but possibly we've got contractors at Shoreline or other places too. So I'm hoping we're pushing them also to go all electric. Thank you.
Triggers another question for me for Tim. Tim, are you finding that the electric equipment is much quieter?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was in the report, or it's, I actually might have just posted it recently. It's like 50% quieter.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on, you know, a blower. It's just the type of noise, the type of piece of equipment, usually like for like, it's definitely less noise.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, are there any virtual speakers? No virtual speakers. So now I return this item back to the committee for comments and And adoption or acceptance of the report.
Look for a recommendation that staff bring this to council.
On consent. So comments?
Well, basically, I think this is a great idea, and I really liked your explanation that what this would do, it would sort of flip the conversation. So a standard operating procedure would be to order an EV unless there were reasons not to do that. I really like that. And I think that having that as a sort of stated goal is always helpful for everybody to have it just clear. So that's one comment. But another thing we didn't really talk too much about the benchmarking. You mentioned that other communities in the area and state have this. And so I was kind of wondering a little bit about how this had gone with them. And then another comment I have is that it seems like from a health point of view, the convergence to leaf blowers and other landscaping, handheld landscaping equipment is really important from a health point of view. I mean, it's noisy and smelly enough if you're just nearby, but if you're the person holding that equipment, it really does impact you. So I'm interested in what we can do to if we could do it as an add-on to help get more of this equipment out. And I know Berkeley has a lending library of basic equipment. There's apparently like 50 tools that many people have in their garage, but you only use once or twice a year, and you can take out of the library. So that would be something I would be kind of interested in, particularly with respect to the leaf blowers, because it sounds like our parks, thank you, Mr. Youngblood, sounds like our parks has really done a lot of piloting, and they figured out what's good, what are good, and they'll probably continue to do that. And that's very helpful for people who, use these really sporadically. They don't really have access to information, or it's hard to get access to information about what really works well. I mean, there is consumer reports, but and other things, but I don't know. It's just not the same as you actually talk to people who. So anyway, the lending library is a comment. I would like something that if we're going to do any add-ons, a lending library of handheld equipment. Something.
Thank you for the suggestion. Our first attempt at the lending library was to supply the Day Worker Center with the lending library, kind of on the assumption that they would have a very high utilization rate for all of their.
That's a great idea.
Right, so we started with that, and then we'd be happy to approach the library and talk with them about phase 2 of that. But thinking that the Day Worker Center was the best starting point.
Yeah.
Does it act as a lending library as well as a?
I know that the library does offer other items that you can borrow besides books. And that has been a model at other locations, other
Oh,
jurisdictions.
I meant, does the Day Worker Center act as a
Oh,
lending
I-
library? But
sorry.
that's a good answer to a
Yeah.
question I didn't ask.
I believe the Day Worker Center lets their clients check
I see.
out those
Just for
materials
clients,
because they've been trained in how to operate the equipment safely.
Okay, more comments?
Comments, I'll move that we recommend the draft policy for council adoption.
I think you can second, and my comments are we going to add, I would support the idea of phase 2 of the lending, exploring phase 2 of the lending library. I mean, I just think the landscaping equipment is important to a lot of people for the carbon reduction reasons, but also and probably air quality too.
We will engage with the library about that immediately. I think we would, if the committee is okay with it, keep it separate from the municipal operations orientation of this policy, but certainly we'll pursue that immediately.
And the other thing I wanted to support, it was in the staff report, but it says that some, oh, I don't know if I can find my exact notes, but it said that for some kinds of fleet, I think not the light duty, but the heavier duty, maybe fire in particular, maybe it was a variety of them, that the analysis could be more nuanced than it now is. So I would also, I think the staff report implied that you were gonna maybe do a more nuanced analysis in the future, or are you going to do that definitely, or should we encourage you to do that?
That's an interesting question. I think right now what we're trying to do is watch and see what happens with the heavy duty, medium and heavy duty regulation. If it stands, then there are exemptions for larger public safety, but vehicles. At that point, we could look at seeing are there opportunities for accelerating, but if that doesn't stand, then maybe it's a larger question. So I think maybe giving us a little bit of time to see what happens with those rules, if they are actually implemented in the next year or so, and then deciding, as we implement this, deciding if there's more action needed on heavy duty in particular. So we could certainly come back to CSC, immediately if things change with the regulatory environment, or Ms. Lynn, would you say a year's time would be about right to delve further if the heavy duty rules are still?
Since we also report out generally on our municipal organization efforts.
Yeah, we do also plan to come back to talk about municipal emissions broadly speaking. So next year or the year after, barring any immediate changes.
Yeah, I'd just like to hear about that. I don't think this is a large part of the city's emissions is fire trucks. But I would like to hear, particularly also if there's smaller ones and it's that whole realm of things I would like to hear. And I think that's all the comments I had. Any additional comments? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye, passes. Thank you. Now we're on 5.2, which is 2023 Community Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lee will commence the presentation.
Thank you. This item will be largely presented by our two climate fellows, which I don't believe the full committee has had a chance to meet. So I'm happy to introduce Grace Kahn and Remy Rin, who have really been lead on the development of our 2023 greenhouse gas emissions. But to start Ms. Kahn and Ms. Rin off, I just wanted to have very similar remarks to the gas-free vehicle and equipment policy that, we're doing a lot of analysis right now. You'll note that the memo includes reference to our decarbonization strategy work, which is underway and will be coming to talk with you about next month. And all of this is happening in the context of quickly shifting bigger picture that we're trying to operate within. So all things from can our partners at Silicon Valley Clean Energy continue to procure renewable energy at affordable rates when there may be tariffs applied to equipment that would be producing energy, or electric vehicles can procure them as easily, all these shifts that are happening. So we've developed this inventory. We're excited to share the information, not as much with a specific focus on the year 2023. There are some trends that maybe are just the tale of COVID that are still kind of showing up in our emissions, especially around transportation. People's work from home, back to return to office patterns hadn't, I think, really stabilized yet. Shift was less, but there's still some changes in that arena. So we're trying to shift our use of this inventory to be a tool to help us think about the bigger picture. So yes, there may be individual shifts, maybe SVCEs, multiplication factor that they give us for how clean their electricity was for a given year. Maybe that's shifted a little bit, but we look at the long goal, they're still heading in the same direction as us of greenhouse gas free electricity. And if we're moving to electrify and they're moving to clean our electricity, we feel like that's in very good alignment. So the yearly shifts are one thing, but the real value in doing these inventories and doing them annually is that it allows us to look at the trends. What is happening in the big picture? You'll see we've introduced a rolling average concept. We still have to kind of roll our way through COVID, so it's going to be a little bit choppy in the coming years, but at some point, we'll get to a point where we have enough of a pattern that we can say, okay, in year 2030, how did 2030 compare to the 5 years prior to that? Because that'll give us a better sense and it'll help reduce the noise of individual annual swings that in the long run are not worrisome, or maybe they are. So we're starting to shift the way we use the inventory. You'll see it like, for example, including the 4-year average and comparing our individual year to that, as opposed to just comparing it to the year. To try to get a clearer perspective on what we're actually learning from the inventory. It's a lot of data, and sometimes that can be a blessing and a curse, like so much information, but we don't want to read into every single category. What we really want to do is take a step backwards and say, are we heading in the right direction? Are we going to get there quickly enough? The only other thing I'll include is that we're working on this decarbonization strategy. Currently, our goals are to be carbon neutral by 2045, but as you know, CSC directed us to look at accelerating those goals. So it may look good, we're on track for now, but if we accelerate our carbon neutrality goal or a decarbonization goal, then maybe we'll have even more work cut out for us. So the big picture takeaway is that it looks good and there's a lot of unknowns still. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Rin.
So to give some background on our methodology, diving into the inventory, it's prepared using a national protocol, the US Community Protocol. And through that, there are some measures that are directly measured, and then other emissions that are estimates. So we have direct measurements for energy used, water consumed and treated, and organic waste that goes to the landfill. And then we use estimates for certain measures such as on-road transportation and usage of off-road mobile equipment. So that's just a overview on the methodology. Pass it back to Ms. Ken.
Thanks. This slide illustrates the results of the community inventories 2015 through 2023, and a rolling average of past inventories 2015, 2017, 2018, and 2019 was used to compare the most recent inventory 2023, and it was used to gauge community emissions reductions. 2020 through 2022 were not included in the rolling average as they are considered anomalies due to the pandemic, and some impacts may still be occurring in 2023, and it remains to be seen if 2023 or 2024 is our new normal post-pandemic. The rolling average comparison allows us to view GHG emission trends over time, and it really provides a general understanding on how policies, programs, and technologies are reducing emissions. The city is on the path towards the decarbonization goal to be carbon neutral by 2045, as the 2023 emissions are 32% below the rolling average baseline. This chart also shows the percent of emissions reductions per sector. On-road transportation, building energy, and the water sectors have made notable reductions due to state policies and city actions, which will be outlined in the following respective slides. This pie chart shows the breakdown of the 2023 emissions by sector. On-road transportation and natural gas for building energy contribute to the vast majority of community-wide emissions, totaling at 80%. And for this presentation, we will walk you through the inventory with a particular focus on these two sectors.
So the first section we're gonna focus on is transportation, which makes up 58% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. Here we can see emissions broken down by type of vehicle, and as we can see, the passenger light duty gasoline continues to dominate in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per year. So in looking at the rolling average baseline, we can see that 2023 emissions have dropped by 44% from our 4-year rolling average. Daily per capita vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, has also decreased from the 4-year average of 18.4 miles to 14.8 miles in 2023. This can be traced due to a combination of effective emission reduction strategies, as well as transportation effects from the pandemic, such as increased remote work rates. Another aspect of this that we wanted to highlight was zero emission vehicle sales in Santa Clara County and Mountain View, such as battery electric vehicles primarily. So in 2023, zero emission vehicles made up 43% of total vehicles sold in Santa Clara County, and I believe this was mismarked in the staff report, so it is 43%. In 2024, it was actually also around 43%, but as we can see here, the numbers did rise in Mountain View zip code specifically. So yeah, so the city continues to work on a variety of different strategies to keep our emissions down in the transportation sector, such as expanding transit-oriented development, urbanizing municipal fleet operations, supporting walkability, boosting biking and public transit ridership, supporting remote work, and reinforcing the community shift to zero emission vehicles. Also wanted to note that staff is bringing a multifamily EV charging gap analysis to the CSC in June, where we will talk about filling in gaps and EV charging for multifamily communities. Staff is also supporting a transportation demand management measure that will be supporting increasing multimodal transportation methods.
So this chart shows energy emissions from electricity and natural gas usage in Mountain View. The energy sector makes up 32% of total community emissions in 2023. Low emission electricity from Silicon Valley Clean Energy continues to drive the majority of Mountain View's energy sector emissions reductions, as shown in the large drop in emissions at 2017. Reductions in electricity emissions are also attributed to the city's REACH codes, which regulate the design and construction of buildings. And what's most notable about the energy sector over the years is that natural gas emissions have remained mostly constant over time and make up over 70% of the energy sector. To address this, the city is encouraging electrification of space and water heating of residential and commercial buildings. And in 2024, the City Council adopted low-cost pre-wire requirements for new buildings that would allow gas appliances to be easily replaced with an electric alternative in the future. Additionally, we just launched the Year of the Water Heater campaign. On the screen, we have Watson, our heat pump water heater mascot. And this includes providing heat pump water heater rebates to help residents electrify their homes. And we also just received a $100,000 grant from SVCE to help further enhance the Year of the Water Heater campaign. Additionally, council decided to include the end of flow policy in council priorities for 2025 through 2027. And REACH codes are anticipated to be developed in the next year, and we expect those to help reduce emissions in the energy sector. And this concludes our presentation, and I'll hand it back to Ms. Lee.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that we also have staff online if you have questions, specific, especially to the transportation emissions. Mr. Pacho is online from the transportation team. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Do committee members have questions?
I'll just add that Ms. Au and Ms. Boyer are also on the Public Works to answer questions about the solid waste emissions as well as Ms. Boyer, I think, across all of the buildings emissions.
Well, I would like to know why the water emissions went down. It's great.
Yes.
What happened?
Someone online?
Ms. Au, would you like to speak?
Regional water quality control plan probably had something.
They changed their operations.
Yeah, they went to better operations. That's right. I read that. Is that?
Yeah, it's in this.
In the staff report.
That's
The public may want to know now that you brought it
Yeah.
up.
It's a big change.
It's big, yeah. It's worth highlighting.
And we pay for most of what happens at the Palo Alto treatment plant, although Palo Alto does the work because most of the waste comes from us. So. Okay, yeah. So it was.
Sorry, so good evening, council members. You're asking about the wastewater emissions reduction in energy use?
Well, I was more, there's a water category. And there's a reduction in the water category and the wastewater, is it all attributed to the wastewater improvements? Okay, that.
Yes, the wastewater one is attributed to the Palo Alto Regional Water Quality Control Plant.
And our fresh water is mostly gravity fed, so there's not a whole lot of energy
Yeah.
used.
Yeah, so.
Water
all
delivery.
all related to the wastewater. Are we expecting additional, I know the Palo Alto treatment plant is having they've been rebuilding for about a decade. Are we expecting additional reductions in the future, or is this kind of it for a while?
I believe they may be working on some energy reduction or looking at others clean energy sources, but I don't have all the details at this time, so I'll have to get back to you on the
Okay.
specifics.
Thank you.
No problem. So sorry, I'm gonna ask the team for the water. You're talking about the water pump stations, and that would be attributed to our use of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, I believe, because our water systems are just power from PG&E. And then we do have some solar panels installed that may be offsetting some of the energy use.
So we have a lot to thank Silicon Valley Clean Energy for all of this, really, which is good.
It's kind of a long love letter to SBC.
Yeah. Well, I guess my only other question is, are you satisfied? I mean, this has been the methodologies and that kind of thing. This has been sort of an evolving process over time that I've been watching it, which makes sense. But how do you feel about this? Do you feel that this is a mature kind of procedure that you have set up now? Or are you expecting, as in the next few years, there to be big changes? Or, I mean, how do you feel about how mature this process is now?
If I may, Ms. Liz, so just look, in fact, the entire team before you was not here during all of the years of the rolling
Right.
average. So it is mature for the city as an organization, but all of us are new and have come from different agencies who have had different approaches to how to measure emissions and what level of effort makes sense. So we've been refining this over time. You'll notice that we're stretching out, the municipal inventory because that allows us to capture gains that are being made by our colleagues in the various departments. It takes time to electrify the fleet or to electrify major systems in buildings. And so conducting an inventory annually might not make sense. Likewise, for the community scale, we're moving towards this rolling average. We may come to this committee with a recommendation that we move to a biannual process as well for a community-wide inventory. So we're still evolving it. Because all of us are still relatively new to the city. I think amongst those of us who are here, I'm the longest standing member of the team and I've been here just over 3 years. So
Yeah, the change to do it annually involved a really quite a few different methodologies and it made the process go from something that took several years really, because there's a lot of hand work to being able to do it in it was just like 3 or 4 months. People working a lot on it. It's a big deal. But anyway, I'm interested in how mature it is, and I do think it's really valuable to continue to, I mean, as a comment, I guess, to continue to evaluate these processes and what makes sense for us.
I only had one for the off-road mobile emissions. Can you just help me? It's been a few years. What category or examples of things that would fit in industrial equipment versus commercial equipment? Where that line is drawn?
Yeah, and that was one of my questions, so I won't, like, what is it? Is my question.
Good question. I do not know.
Technology.
An example of industrial would be forklifts versus commercial.
So I was trying to meld construction equipment, industrial and commercial in my head because a couple of them are very stable. Construction obviously went with the economy. It's not an important question, it's just something I was curious.
We're happy to circle back with a more specific answer for you.
Yeah, actually, my question on that, because it's been stable, but as other things go down, it becomes a more prominent. And it doesn't,
Yeah,
it
it's way up
becomes
here.
more prominent. So I'm like, at some point I want to understand what that is because I actually don't have much of an idea of what it is and whether they, are they electrifying forklifts? Okay, so my questions were, so overall on the, is related to this mature, so the staff report says the inventory doesn't capture all local emissions related to the community, like emissions from food, air travel, manufactured goods, they're hard to measure, et cetera. So, staff reports have been saying that since I've been here, and I'm wondering as methodologies, move on. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that is actually in the carbon footprint of the city that we're just like, we can't make that. But as we, as we reduce vehicle and building emissions in the water treatment, some of these are, if you put them on the pie chart, they might be larger than what we have. And at some point, are we going to capture them? Are there cities doing that? Have you heard any talk of it?
I have not. Have you?
I think Member Showalter's comment too is, the value of the inventory. I mean, there's good value in measuring the things we can measure and then trying to talk through or present going forward kind of the other actions that would not be so much captured in the inventory, but are still impactful to HG emission reductions.
The way that we try to think about it is sort of, and already this inventory is a bit of a stretch because it's sort of like, what do we as an organization, right, as a city have leverage over? So this bigger life cycle question of emissions that evolve, emerge from the food choices that people make or, packaging and global supply chains. Even if we have that information very specific to the city of Mountain View, our sway over that is much lower than like our own built environment within our city limits or the ways that we facilitate better transportation patterns or reduction in transportation emissions. Even that, right, it's hard for us to force individual households to purchase electric vehicles. But we have some level of influence by making charging infrastructure available. Ensuring we have a grid that can handle that level of demand for electricity. So we've tended to focus on this level of emissions mostly because from that can flow the lowest hanging fruit in terms of like what programs and policies can we do as a result of this. It doesn't mean that we don't also think about those other levels of emissions. So you may have attended some of our plant-based eating community events where we try to engage the community in these kinds of discussions. So raising awareness, using community engagement around bigger questions of like what's driving climate change. We still do try to focus on that. But trying to put effort into measuring it when the methodology is still quite hard. We just haven't gotten into that space. We haven't evolved to that yet. As soon as we can decarbonize all of the buildings and once Denise is done with that, then we.
Yeah, it seems to me there might be some opportunity, like air flight, for instance.
Yes.
In the same way that we measure car travel. And it might be informative. It's kind of, you make choices. Do you fly or do you vacation or something? I realize you can work on these even if you don't measure them, but I was just wondering
Yeah.
if I would like to know if you find other people doing some of those.
We will certainly continue to ask. I was just at Climate Week, all of last week, and there were 25,000 from across the country that are working on climate change. Didn't see a lot of discussion on life cycle, but we continue to reach out to our peers, and we want to know what other folks are up to. So certainly on the lookout. Of course, we also care about that.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the same pieces.
We talked to Igley as well, who helps us develop the inventory about what's working or what things we would like to expand upon. We've been doing this for over a decade now,
Yes.
and that's why most cities use all provided by through their ClearPath tool. So I think that's promising as well, that they're also very open to understanding how to ensure their inventory and capture more of the emissions that make sense for local policy.
I went to an Igley session last Wednesday and I talked to them, and we're actually going to be scheduling a follow-up meeting with them to learn about, they have a ClearPath 2.0. So, we're asking, there's
that in tech.
that's why the new, so they have.
2.0.
Right, exactly.
That's all you need to know.
They have more information about economic trade-offs for urbanization. And I think they're starting to verge into adaptation. So we'll ask them about the other scopes of emissions as well.
So on transportation policy, it says it's challenging to capture because it uses aggregates and modeling. And I've always been modeling from municipalities around us is my understanding. And I've always been a little troubled by that because if we're doing way better than them, we just assume that we're doing just as well, or if we do way worse, that we're doing just as well. And so is there an opportunity to measure that? I've heard there are other ways of measuring that may be coming online. Is that true and closer to coming online?
Well, and the city has had an interesting approach to modeling transportation emissions. We've created a customized transportation demand management model, then updated it periodically about every 10 years. And so our inventories have this cycle of like very accurate to like, and over time, the model becomes outdated and is in need of update. I believe the update is underway. So we're very excited about having a new look on our transportation emissions. Mr. Pacho is online from the transportation team, and hopefully I didn't botch that too much. Did you have anything to add?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the question. So, right, I think our traffic section is kind of in the midst of updating the travel demand model, while the transportation section is working on developing the transportation demand management ordinance, which you're aware, and we'll bringing the framework to council on June 10th. So we've set ambitious targets for trip reduction, and this follows from areas in North Bayshore where we've set really high trip reductions for peak hour, and we've now are looking at reducing average daily trips. We understand because of COVID, we're not seeing the volumes of traffic to the extent that we were pre-COVID. So while we're seeing reduced travel volume, we are seeing a higher single occupancy vehicle rate, and so we do believe that the ordinance can be a key strategy for reducing SOV trips and reducing our per capita and per employee VMT rate as well. So it's kind of key strategies from transportation that we're focused on, because again, that's the stickier part. And to Danielle's point, the city only really has purview, I think, from my understanding is, scope 1 emissions, the one that we have direct control that's within our city boundaries. Scope 2 and 3 emissions are a little bit stickier because it follows along supply chain that we don't immediately have control over. But I know that there are policies at the state level, such as SB 253, which requires companies in gross receipts over 1 billion having to report their scope 2 and 3 emissions. So that I think would give jurisdictions visibility over how much emissions that they're actually generating, and would help us kind of corroborate our own inventory. So that's something that transportation and sustainability are kind of in conversation with. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. So another question, I was glad to see under transportation, virtual travel and EVs added. Do you, Waymo is about to drop ride hailing in Mountain View, and I don't know how you're going to fit that in. I mean, I guess maybe it's no different. Like you have a category which is taxis. That sounds a little outdated. Taxis, motorcycles, or other means. I guess ride hailing, EV ride hailing. So I'm just interested in how that changes this. I see a Waymo in front of Hope's Corner idling all the time. Seen that too. I don't really understand the technology and what's going on there, but I would like to know how that's affecting. I mean, it's electric, so maybe it's just the amount of charging, but are they just driving around all the time? Maybe it's more a traffic thing than a emissions thing, but and I also am afraid that they will impact mass transit use unless policymakers make an effort to make sure they don't. So I would like to track that in some way. I guess that's a comment, sorry. And the Year of the Water Heater campaign, are you going to come and report back to us in more detail about that? Okay, so I will hold all questions and comments on that. Okay, and then the food service is ordinance, is that enforced?
We don't have Ms. Cutter on the line. I don't know at what phase we are in the enforcement. I know that there was a grace period, a kind of a transition period for commercial establishments.
Yeah, but explain. I'd love to hear a report back on that too, because I feel like it's not enforced right now. And then figure 7, solid waste emissions. Why did it spike up in 2017 through 19? So it's figure 7 with solid waste emissions, and there's a big spike in 17 through 19. Why? Otherwise, it's steadily going down, which is nice.
Related to more development. Being
Boom
generated,
times.
yeah.
Oh, really?
So the economic booms and the recessions, you'll definitely see waste very
So
much track with
building, you
economic
think
risks.
solid waste and building and demolition.
I think there's a
And general
couple
consumption.
state regulations too that have been regulating organic waste as well that have been coming online.
Okay, those are my questions. So now, if there are no more questions from committee members, it would be any comments from the public.
Could I jump in quickly
Oh, sure.
to circle back to the off-road emissions question? I looked into it a bit more. So the industrial equipment includes things such as aerial lifts, forklifts, material handling equipment, and sweepers or scrubbers. And then the commercial equipment includes air compressors, gas compressors, generator sets, pressure washers, pumps, and welders. So those are some examples of
All those things that are more unique than vehicle cars that are likely to electrify more slowly. Okay, good to know. Thank you. Okay, if there are no more committee member questions, members of the public in person?
Yeah. Hello, Shawani again. I'm just curious about the natural gas inventory. It seems like, according to one of the graphs that you presented, it's not going down. It's staying pretty much constant, which tells me that the efforts for electrifications for residential or commercial use of the buildings for, heating the buildings, water and et cetera, is not changing, which is really surprising to me because I think there have been a lot of efforts by the Sustainability Committee and the city to do electrification, efforts and programs like the coal blocks and incentives and, from various places. So I just wondered if there's any explanation for that.
Right, Bruce Carney again. So a couple things. One of the first slides said the reason you do an annual inventory is to compare actuals to goals. But this inventory doesn't do that. There's no mention of the goals. In fact, the city doesn't actually have a 2023 goal. It has a 2020 and a 2025. So you need to interpolate to find the goal. But I think it should be there. In previous inventories, we've had a nice graph that makes it clear that we were tracking pretty well. And then COVID came along and made it look like great. But of course, we know we're not. The good news about the rising electricity footprint is that SVCE says that they're going to get things back under control and get the GHG emissions from the electricity that they procure very close to zero again. In 2023, they were actually pretty substantially high. So that's a source of future reductions as more inventories are done. The other thing that I learned from Denise because I asked, but isn't in this report, is that our service population continues to be well below the pre-pandemic levels. And all of that, all the decrease is from workers, not from nighttime residents. So that's something that may or may not change as the economy moves forward. I believe there was a change too to say that we're going to take a closer look at emissions from those companies who have the ability to purchase power privately, not from SVC or from PG&E. And we know that they're almost all committed to zero carbon emissions. So that's a change from previous emission protocols, as I recall. All right, so what is the takeaway I'd like you to take away from this? We had the great one-time impact of SVCE. We're looking forward to the ongoing impact of EVs replacing gasoline-powered vehicles. So where are we not seeing progress? As Hala said, we're not seeing progress in natural gas use. And if we were to change the protocol, the one protocol change I would suggest is that we figure the leakage emissions of methane from the wellhead to its use here in Mountain View as part of our footprint, and not, even though it doesn't take place mostly in Mountain View, if we got off the grid, off a gas grid entirely, we could claim that those emissions don't belong to us. But as long as we have pressurized natural gas pipelines, I think those emissions belong to us. And if they did, and if we're not decreasing them, that would be one more reason why getting rid of gas is the most important thing that the council can recommend.
Thank you. More in-person speakers?
I'm Mary Dadio. I'm excited to see the reduction that we've had to date. Unfortunately, there seem to be going in the wrong direction with the active transportation percentage of travel. When you look at that chart about how many people are walking and biking, the numbers are smaller than in 2015. Encouraging active transportation relies a lot on capital projects that are just really slow to get moving forward. And so some of those are now starting to come into play, which I'm excited to see. Also on transportation demand management, both those are long lead time items and keeping the shuttle running. So I just hope the city sticks with it and continues to invest in those things and isn't discouraged by these numbers. You're the water heater. I didn't read all the details, but I wonder how applicable it is to apartments. And I hope there are some programs tailored for apartment buildings because that's such a high percentage of our housing stock in Mountain View. Preferably before 2027, when the air quality management district rules come into effect, banning the purchase of gas water heaters. So it'd be really good to start pushing the market and including apartment owners and landlords in the direction of eliminating gas before the edict comes down and says you can't buy any new ones in 2027. I also hope it'd be really nice. I realize where the metrics that we get from this are, we're just now looking at 2023. I know if people are getting rebates for the electric water heaters, you'll have a good count of maybe a decent count of how many people have electrified. We'll have it like a number, but it'd be really nice at the same time to see in nearer real time, what does our gas look like as a result of that effort? And so if there's some way to be able to get some kind of feel for the 2025 gas as at the same time that you're reporting, here's how many water heaters we did, we could actually not have to wait until 2027 to see our natural gas, to see the effect of that. I think that would be a real boost. Thank you.
I'm John Scarborough. I'm a Mountain View resident, and I like the report overall. It's very nice. I like the rolling average. That makes sense. And I would encourage you to look into other normalizations, some things that might, although the absolute reduction is really what counts for the environment, I think the normalizations can show us where to look at different things like we were mentioning or was mentioning earlier about the natural gas use in our built infrastructure. It would be interesting to see what the changes are for natural gas per square foot, or, apartment buildings, new apartment building versus old versus single family housing, row housing, things like that, to see where we might be better able to focus. That's like the longer term aspects. Speaking of built infrastructure for walkable, bikeable, and transit oriented, I think not only is that going to help us reduce our footprint, it's also going to make us more resilient if we're not able to travel quite as much because of increased fuel prices or other things. So I think that makes a better community and makes it easier on our residents to have that available. Glad to see decarbonization of buildings is focused on. And I was curious on the transportation, how that would break down if we could get the short trips, like either in town or to Sunnyvale or Palo Alto, things that could easily be transitable or bikeable, versus long trips and people driving through that we may not have much control over. So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Virtual speakers?
Bruce England.
Hi, everybody. Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive. Just in short, want to echo what Mary Dadio brought up and what John Scarborough alluded to also around the importance of alternative transportation means, particularly active transportation and also transit. We out in the community who've been following this stuff can sometimes get frustrated because we feel there's a lot or maybe too much focus on vehicle transportation and not considering things like road diets and speed limit reductions and things like that would help to encourage people to get out of their cars and onto their means. When I look around when I'm moving around town, I sure see a lot more cars than I do people biking. And one thing that tells me is that people feel more comfortable getting in their cars and driving than they do getting on their bikes and biking in Mountain View. I think we could improve that. Thank you.
Thank you. More virtual speakers? Okay, so now we bring this back to the committee for discussion and then to accept the report. Are there discussion points? I assume we're going to accept the report. So are there any discussion points first?
Well, I'm not sure whether. Sorry, I'm not sure whether this is the right place for it, but one of the things I'm interested in is the voting that changes. And so the REACH code that we developed and put into place was really impactful. You showed us how much, how many houses were electrified by that. It was really inspiring. I mean, it was like 2,000 houses in the time we did it, or maybe it was 1,700. It was a large number. And so I think that keeping up with building code is something that was really important for these changes as well. That would be my comment. But anyway, but all in all, I mean, I think this is great. And it just goes back to the old, what gets measured gets followed and done. And so it's really important for us to measure these things so that we can understand, how they're changing or they're not changing and behave accordingly. So this is very, very important work. And I really appreciate that it's being done. I'm really proud that it's being done. And I also hope that this is an opportunity for you professionally to grow. And if you see things, as you work on this, that these methodologies do need to be matured, that there's an atmosphere where, we want to create an atmosphere where you feel very comfortable, suggesting that and bringing it to us, because that's exactly what we need to do.
I'll just make a few comments. First, I agree with what members of the public said generally, that and I agree with adding a goal next time so that we can see how we're doing with respect to the goal. And then the comment about gas leakage, is that something that how to find, or is that, do you have any more information on that?
I don't have specifics. There are sort of generally agreed upon rates of leakage, and we could look at the overall movement of natural gas through the system. What percentage of it is coming to Mountain View, and that could be the calculation. So calculate somewhat easily what the leakage attributed to our community if we were measuring that. And then if we added that in and then eliminated natural gas usage, then we can take it back out of our emissions and show it as a reduction.
Well, it was an interesting comment, and any more information you have, I would be interested. But generally, I just agree with what Member Showalter said, that this is to inform our policy. So as you work on it, if something jumps out at you, do tell us. And if there are ways to refine it and make it more informative, do that. We're done about it too. And yeah, I agree. We have to do from the active transportation. Those are my, and also I would like included more information on the sort of as the ride hailing rolls out, if that's affecting anything. And Also, I think it may have impact on mass transit, reducing it. So I would like to know about that and have some policy ideas. So those are my comments. And did you make a motion?
Glad to make a motion to accept this and forward it on to the City Council for approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, now we move on to 5.3, which is the proposed framework for the climate vulnerability assessment. And this item will be presented by Sustainability Division staff. Ms. Lucky will commence the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Higgs. Next slide. Just some background on conducting the climate vulnerability assessment. Council approved a scope of work in November of 2024, and ultimately decided to contract with Cascadia Consulting Group to perform the work. So since November, staff has been working with the Cascadia team to develop a framework for undertaking a climate vulnerability assessment, otherwise known as a CVA for short. And tonight we're seeking your review and considering approval of the framework to continue to proceed with the overall development of a CVA. So what is a climate vulnerability assessment? It evaluates how susceptible a community is to the negative impacts of climate change to really support adaptation planning or decision-making around what we expect in the future that we might not know now. The way this is typically done is through panel on climate change. So there's some guiding principles and framework to work from. So we were looking at the Cascadia team on what would work for the city of Mountain View. And it does have it has a formula and how it gets accomplished. So we look at our exposure. So what's our exposure to extreme heat, extreme wind events because of extreme weather events. And then we understand what's our sensitivity to that. So even looking at how maybe different neighborhoods might be impacted. Maybe some neighborhoods might be impacted more by high winds than others, or extreme heat than others, because maybe there's not enough canopy cover. And then we also subtract our adaptive capacity. So if there are neighborhoods that have a lot of canopy cover, maybe the extreme heat impacts are different in that neighborhood versus another. And that's how we calculate what our vulnerability risk is. So the CVA's project deliverables really include identifying what the climate risks are. I mentioned some of them: extreme heat, wildfire. A lot of people are starting to understand and being very concerned about air quality events that result from wildfires and the sensitivity to vulnerable community members like seniors or children. Wind, I mentioned, and flooding, and their impacts to specific mountain neighborhoods. And so I would say too that there's been a lot of work at the county level in understanding what climate risk we face. And so this would be a deeper dive from that kind of aggregated data into what that looks like for each neighborhood in Mountain View. And the CVA would also look at potential actions that we could take, help increase our resilience, our adaptability to climate change. So the climate vulnerability assessment will help, it'll work with other plans or efforts that we're working on. So one of them is the city's biodiversity and urban forest plan that's currently underway. And so the CVA will help in informing the biodiversity plan and what elements or what things could be incorporated, such as extreme heat, and how that could be included maybe through increased canopy in certain areas. For sea level rise, we've done a lot of work as a community to address, since we're so close to the bay. And so this CVA would also help fill in the gaps. So I mean, we've looked at sea level rise, we're looking at biodiversity, but it's kind of where else in extreme heat and wind could we also incorporate those findings into the sea level rise planning and implementation in the biodiversity plan. So the proposed focus areas, there's 4 areas. So the first one would be buildings and infrastructure. So looking at what how climate risk would impact single and multifamily residential buildings. For transportation, it's looking at roads, any infrastructure related to roads, public transportation services, how they could be impacted by these extreme climate events. And of course, that leads into emergency management. So how would the police department, the fire department be impacted? And how would we respond, or how could we help prevent emergency situations with individuals who might experience like heat exhaustion? And looking at critical facilities such as schools, hospitals, care centers. The other area that we're very interested in learning more about is how does climate change impact economic well-being and resilience? So how does that impact productivity? How does these events overall impact the economic health of the community as well? And then there's also health and well-being. So this has been more studied recently in the last several years about where, there's the physical impacts, when you have an extreme heat event or you're unable, to travel somewhere, but also looking at the mental health impacts, the anxiety that it can create when you're facing extreme heat events and you might not have the appropriate tools to manage your lifestyle during these events. So the recommendation is to consider approval of the framework and the deliverables and the focus areas for conducting the climate vulnerability assessment, and then present a draft to you in the fall. And based on your feedback tonight, our hope is to present to the city council by the end of the year or early next year. That concludes my presentation.
The only thing I'd like to add is that you'll note that this is sort of sparse on details. And the reason for that is that we wanted to engage the committee very early in the process. So we've only just gotten into contract with Cascadia and started, we started first with the decarbonization strategy, which we'll be talking next month about. And we're starting now the work of the community on the climate vulnerability assessment. And we wanted to talk with you all very early on to say, here's the general direction we're headed. When we return with more information, it'll be fleshed out. We wanted to just make sure we're in that.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee members, are there questions?
I guess the only one I have is where do pandemics fit in?
So interesting. Right, because we don't really know about the correlation between pandemics specifically and changes in our temperatures. Like we've seen migration of disease, like disease incidents in areas, malaria, Lyme disease. But we don't have a real sense at the pandemic scale.
So it's just
That's
not
fascinating though.
Yeah, so we're not really included.
No.
Okay. I mean, so far we've had one every 100 years. In the last 200.
Right.
We've had one every 100 years. Okay.
Let's hope it's not like a 100-year flood where they
Yeah.
happen every 10 years now.
Yeah, I have. I haven't heard this. It's very interesting. It's beautiful.
So, let's see. So you have 4 areas that you're intending to look at: buildings and infrastructure, emergency management. For emergency management, are you intending to work at all with our CERT program? Emergency response.
Yeah, absolutely. We met initially with both the chief of police and the fire chief, and they asked that we talk with our Office of Emergency. And I was forgetting his. And who
Emergency preparedness.
Who manages the CERT program.
Right.
He has like 80 titles. He does so many jobs. So certainly the request has been that we work with. But there are other impacts to public safety
For sure.
that are interesting that we haven't really looked into.
I have had when we had the power shutdowns and some neighborhoods were impacted day after day and multiple times. People said that our CERT program needs to be updated for more than earthquakes. So that was a common request. So that came immediately to mind. Because many residents were not empowered. And then another is health and well-being. Will you be working with partners like the county that does health? That's more their thing than ours, and also like El Camino does grants, and Kaiser does too. So are you going to be working with those kinds of partners?
Yeah, absolutely. I've only had discussions so far with the SAR, who operates in this region. About resiliency and adaptation. So certainly, and then also our community-based organizations. So we've had discussions with Community Services Agency about how to support older adults that are clients of theirs, that are also residents of the city, that could be more impacted by students, for example. So discussions with them. So certainly all different ranges on the spectrum in terms of.
Well, El Camino has fairly significant grants, and I think they would probably in general be interested. And then do you, with buildings and infrastructure, I imagine you'll interface with working on our housing and homeless strategy and economic well-being with our economic quality strategy. I mean, okay. Okay, so now it's time for comments from members of the public. There are any? Some comments?
Hi, Mary Dadio. I'm not sure if it fits. I was hoping to see that slide. I'm not sure. I don't see where it fits in there, and maybe it's more of a county program. If we could go back to that slide. But on resilience, I guess I was thinking to see more than just business resilience. I was hoping we'd see. Is the city going to be considering taking steps for like cooling centers and how to coordinate with people on cooling centers? Because we do have quite a few city buildings that could serve as cooling centers if needed. And also in other emergencies too, flooding or earthquake. I don't know if that's part of the community emergency response. I'm aware of what's going on in my neighborhood, but I haven't heard anything about a broader thing, especially again, because we have so many people in apartment buildings. Here again, for heat, especially heat pumps are so critical in apartment buildings because it's gonna make it so much easier for so many people that don't have air conditioning today to get to have cooling in their house. So I'm not sure if there are any grants that are going to be available that we could make use of to help us address HVAC in heating and cooling in apartment buildings because of resilience piece of it, but that might be another angle. Thank you.
I'm John Scarborough again, and I like the idea and would encourage the focus on people and resilience and mutual aid kind of things we could do within the local areas to add to that.
Any other in-person speakers, virtual speakers?
Phone number ending in 793. You can unmute. Oh, there we go.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I want to thank the committee for all the hard work you put into this. There's a lot of detail in it. What's going to be important, as it's been mentioned a couple of times, is to be able to continue to monitor and manage this. As somebody said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so I think that's going to be important. We need to look at it on a frequent enough basis so that if there is a need to put in corrective actions, we have the time to do so. And again, I want to thank the committee for the work they put into this.
Thank you. Any more virtual speakers? Okay, so now we bring it back to the committee for discussion and probable adoption of the proposed framework.
I think overall it's, I mean, this is the early version, right? We'll have the fleshed out version in the fall, and I think it's on the right track. Anything specific to change your at?
Yeah, I'm pleased with it too. I guess the only thing I noted in my notes is, you know, buildings and infrastructure under transportation, we should add trails too. I think that we're really important for making sure people can walk and bike around. But no, it's great.
So my comments were really reflected through the questions. I won't add any more. That, does anybody want to?
I'll move that we approve the framework to rules and analysis focus areas for conducting the vulnerability assessment.
We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, this is unanimously, and we are now on item number 6, which is committee staff comments, questions, and committee reports. And no action will be taken on these. Do any CSC members or staff have comments or questions?
We have very brief updates for you. It will be, yeah, okay. But just wanted to share a few things that are happening.
Good news, I hope.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll all chime in. News first. Ms. Ross.
Thank you. We had a beautiful Earth and Arbor Day celebration on Saturday, April 19th, attended by thousands of community members. It featured the all-electric Dream Home from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, allowing community members to experience electric devices, as well as many community booths and many hands-on sustainability-focused activities.
Oh, we had Danielle as our
Watson. And it was Watson.
The duties assigned. That's me.
That's
That's a heat pump water heater.
And since we were last here, we have completed outreach and engagement events, including the city's large Dia de Muertos celebration. Went to the farmers market twice. We did 4 Cool Block information sessions and 4 leadership training sessions for Cool Block leaders, which does cover energy resilience in times of outage and other related occurrences. And then also we're at the Sunshine Gardens EcoMart. We completed recruitment for Cool Block, and our teams have started, including one of our audience members here, which we appreciate. We had the Earth and Arbor Day photo contest, induction cooking, and heat pump water heating focused engagement with the community. We've had a plant-based pantry series hosted by Grace. They are very short reels online that are very popular with the Mountain View community. And then 2 quarterly newsletters in December and May to the sustainability community list. And we have a few upcoming summer events, and that list will no doubt expand as we get closer to summer.
And I've been working on the Extreme Heat and Community Preparedness Program, which is a $25,000 grant from Santa Clara County to help us support vulnerable community members during climate events such as extreme heat and poor air quality. I've been working with CSA to develop this. We're working on educational flyers, which are being translated into the top languages spoken in the city. And I'm also working on procurement for items for the resilience toolkit, such as masks, electrolyte packets, hand fans, water bottles, etc. And then at the beginning of summer, we'll start engaging with residents to hand out those kits. We'll prepare.
Yes, we've been continuing our efforts in decarbonizing city operations. So for buildings, we have signed contracts to secure additional 41,000 in PG&E incentives for additional heat pump water heater projects that are, I believe the majority of those should have been completed in the past week. And then we have capital improvement program projects underway for solar installation at Senior Center, Wisman Sports Center, and Mountain View Sports.
Upcoming CSC items and council items, so you can look forward to having presentation and discussion around decarbonization analysis. We're gonna have a working session in June. We're gonna look at kind of the wedge analysis. How do the federal, state, and policies like break down, and what are we individually responsible for as a community? So it's, I think.
It's a dynamic model. We've asked them to sort of take out like entire chunks federal legislation.
As Ms. Wren mentioned, we discussed about multifamily electric vehicle charging analysis, code update as well. And for city council, the items we discussed tonight, moving forward, look forward to seeing these items again in the next.
Okay, do committee members have any reports? Updates? In that case, we will move on to item number 7, which is adjournment. And the meeting is adjourned at 8:03 p.m.